Hey guys, it's Alexander, and today I am diving in to my first 5 months of owning a red Epic Dragon in 2024/25. Let's go. So I know what you're thinking. Why did I buy a camera that's 10 years old? Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Number one, me being a fan of Red since they debuted 10 years ago, but never being able to actually afford one of their cameras, the prices recently have come down substantially to a point where I can actually finally attain one of these cameras. Now, when the Red Epic Dragon sensor debuted 10 years ago, it was rated one of the best digital sensors in the world at the time. So, looking at this camera today, 10 years later, and comparing it to modern cinema cameras, it really holds up extremely well. Now, I know whether or not you're a fan of the brand Red or not, you have to give them credit. The brand speaks for itself. It is a recognizable brand. The cameras on set are instantly recognizable. And bottom line, I just wanted to own a Red. This has been one of the hardest reviews I have ever done. So much so that I actually shot this video 3 separate times. Because the more and more I learn about this camera, my experience keeps changing with it for the better. I keep learning more and I keep wanting to add more into the videos that I hadn't previously included. So what I've done is I've actually split this video into 3 separate videos diving into other areas about this camera, areas that each deserve their own spotlight. So I'll discuss that further. So who am I and why did I buy a Red camera? Well, I am a speech language pathologist. Yeah, my 9 to 5 is not filmmaking. Now, I used to work in Hollywood and I used to shoot a wide variety of short films, music videos, commercials, but all that is behind me and I mainly work in medical now. So why did I buy this camera? Well, let's dive in. So in the Red lineup, you have the Red 1, that was their very first camera. Then you have the Red 1 MX. Then after that, Red Epic, Red Scarlet, and finally, Red debuted Dragon, the Dragon sensor. Now, if you were already a Epic or a Scarlet user, Red allowed you to upgrade or swap out your old sensor for the new Dragon sensor and really take advantage of the new 16.5 stops of dynamic range, the 6K resolution, the fact that it was not quite, or it was larger than Super 35, but also not quite full frame. Either way, they have shot some amazing films on Dragon, such as Gone Girl, The Martian, and Stranger Things. So like I mentioned before, I've always been a fan of Red, but I could never afford to join the club. They were just too expensive. When the Dragon came out, it debuted at almost 40 grand for either the body or a kit, some kind of setup with that, and that was just too unattainable for me. So when I did use it, I either rented it or I would borrow it from a friend to use on a variety of projects that I shot on. Now that the price has come down significantly, I've been able to acquire one. So what's been my experience like and what should you expect by buying one of these cameras? Well, let's dive in. So Reducation. This camera is not like other cameras that I've used. There is a pretty big learning curve to this. A lot of the tutorials online for this camera are either 5 years old or even 10 years old, and much of what was discussed or even shared either isn't relevant today because of different software being used or upgraded, or the fact that it's just not relevant anymore. And so for me, learning this camera has been a trial and error process. Learning myself, again through trial and error, reading online blogs like Reddit, or even just reading the manual for this camera. So it's been quite the learning curve. So like I mentioned, this is a very different camera that I'm used to working with. And I've shot with Blackmagic, I've shot with Red Dragon before, even Red 1, and Canon C300, but now my main workhorse is a Sony a7 IV, mainly for weddings. And so again, this has been a really big learning curve for me. So Red's red code has been absolutely amazing to work with, but you have to know what you're doing if you want to get good results with it. For instance, this camera doesn't have a base ISO like other cameras. Instead, upping the ISO or turning it down is essentially like adding a LUT to what the sensor is capturing, and it's turning the brightness up or down. So it's not realistic to a point where you can actually light based off what the monitor is showing you. It's almost just it's false advertisement. You have to know by looking at the traffic lights on the camera, looking at false color, reading what the histogram's telling you, in order to really get a good understanding of what the raw sensor is capturing, or else you will be sadly disappointed like how I've been after shooting a project, importing it into DaVinci Resolve, and just seeing how grainy the image might become. So by being able to capture or give the sensor enough light by using the traffic lights, false color, the different graphs that professional cinematographers use, by using all those tools, you'll be able to give the sensor the amount of light that it needs, and you'll get a great image. I promise you that. But I learned that the hard way through trial and error. So learn from me and don't follow my mistakes. So the kit that I bought with this camera came with the skin tone OLPF. Now every red dragon sensor needs some kind of OLPF to go over it, whether it's the standard, the low light, or like mine, the skin tone. Now, from what I've read online, the skin tone OLPF almost knocks down a stop of light, which makes it a lot harder to capture stuff. And so again, you really need a lot of light for this skin tone OLPF to make it look good, which is kind of why I want to upgrade to the low light version. But essentially, learning that through trial and error and seeing the results of either underexposing or exposing correctly, you essentially, for me with this OLPF, need to either light according to ISO 250 or 400. Now, if you're like me and you're coming over from Sony mirrorless with all of those low light features, that's a difficult switch, going from all of the convenience of being able to crank your ISO to 3200, 6400, or even 12,800 ISO, which is insane. Going from all of that to ISO 250 or 400, it's like shooting film again. It's really difficult. And so as a DP or cinematographer, it really tests your lighting skills and test just your knowledge of being able to give the sensor enough light. Now, from what I've heard, this sensor is rated from ISO 800 to even 3200, but I believe that's either with the standard OLPF or the low light version, not the skin tone. So hopefully I can upgrade soon and do some more tests to see what the results might look like. Okay, fully manual. This camera is truly a cinema camera. Wait, what does that even mean? So what I mean by that is that coming from the Sony line or even the Canon RF line to this camera, there's no autofocus. There's no in-body stabilization. This camera is heavy, it's big, it's loud. It has a very slow boot up time. It eats a lot of memory. The memory cards are expensive. And last but not least, this camera needs black shading before you use it. So with all that being said, this camera is not meant for run and gun use. It's not meant to be operated by one person. It's meant to have a crew. It's meant to be on set for bigger productions. And it's meant to have a focus puller. It's meant to have a DIT. It's meant to have a professional gaffer to give it the light that it needs. Now, has that stopped me from using it on a wedding? No, it hasn't. I've shot 3 weddings with this camera already. Again, with that huge list that I just said, you could find workarounds for all those things, but you have to know that going into this camera. So, accessories. This is the last area I'll touch on because I'm gonna have 3 other videos that I'm gonna dive into to elaborate more on this camera. But before I give my final results, let's talk accessories. So this has been a pro and a con for me. And it kind of depends on how you want to approach it or even look at it. Now, again, this camera is over 10 years old, so they don't really make accessories for it anymore. So finding them online has been really difficult. It's almost like a scavenger hunt trying to find either red mini mags or trying to find the pro audio module for the back or even the V-mount adapter for this thing, the proprietary red volt batteries, whatever you want to add onto this camera, it's going to be a hunt to try and find this. But what's really cool about this is that at the same time, these are accessories that are 10 years old. So they're not really relevant today, and no one's really looking for these things, or really there's not a high demand for these things. So when they pop up, they are vastly cheaper than when they debuted originally. I believe from what I've heard online is that when the Red Mini Mag first debuted like 10 years ago, it would be like $3,000 for just a 480 gigabyte mag. $3,000 for just the memory card. And fast forward to today, I got my 480 gigabyte card for $400. So that's kind of the pro and con. It's hard to find stuff, but when you do, it's usually vastly cheaper than when it came out. Now, what's been cool is that I've had this for 5 months now. And over that 5 months, I've been kind of scouring the web. I've been on eBay, I've been on Facebook Marketplace, I've been on OfferUp, different forums and things like that. And I've been able to acquire a couple of Red Mini Mags now. I got the original proprietary Red V-mount battery adapter for the back, so that's kind of cool too. I've also got the Red Bomb EVF for this camera, and that's been really awesome to use and work with. And I'm trying to find still the Pro audio module for the back to be able to use XLRs straight into camera. That would be kind of cool for interview setups. But one thing that I was also stoked about that I was able to find is a gimbal solution for this camera. This is a heavy camera. With it fully rigged out for the most part on a bare bones setup, it's around 10, 11, 12 pounds, which is pretty hefty for any modern gimbal. So I'm going to talk more about that later in a different video about my experience using that setup. But again, finding anything for this camera is going to be a challenge, but when you do, it's going to be a pretty good deal, which is kind of cool. So this video has been way longer than I intended it to be, and I apologize. But 10 years of Red's history, I can't just gloss over that. And so I have listed so many cons to this camera that I'm sure I've probably scared a lot of you guys away from even thinking about buying this. So what's my take on it? Well, I'll be honest with you guys. This is the best camera I have ever owned and used, period. Now, filmmaking for me is a passion of mine, but this camera has re-inspired my love for filmmaking. It has made me a better gaffer and cinematographer. It's made me a better colorist. And overall, it's just been the greatest piece of gear I could add to my arsenal. When used right, this camera can provide some just beautiful images. Something that my Sony a7 IV could never capture. Something that even some cameras today can't even capture because of just how good this sensor was when it first debuted and how well it stacks up to today. So, is this camera good for you? I don't know. You decide. But either way, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.